The Unfiltered by Jade.
Jade. Welcome to The Unfiltered by Jade, where we educate, empower, and entertain. Feel free to like, share, subscribe, download, donate, and make everybody know about this.
Beats by RB Records.
Shopping assistance, your style, your budget. Our services include online and local shopping for individuals and businesses, personal shopping, purchasing of company and office supplies, importing and exporting small packages across Jamaica and worldwide, and helping you find unique gifts and items for all events and occasions. Contact us at 876-919-5195 or shoppingassistance2015@gmail.com. Shopping Assistance, your style, your budget.
Welcome back to The Unfiltered by Jade. Today we have with us here Darren Salmon, and we are here to speak about the worst relationship advice ever. This is an interesting topic, and we're going to talk about different advice that we probably shouldn't have gotten, shouldn't have listened to, shouldn't have used, and we're going to look at the flip side of it. How can a bad relationship advice actually help? So before we even jump right into it, I'm going to ask Darren to introduce himself. Hi, Darren.
Hey, Jade. So
How are
yeah,
you?
people. I'm well, giving God thanks.
God has definitely been faithful. I want you to introduce yourself, let people know who you are.
All right, cool. Well, my name is Darren Salmon. I was born June 9, 1991. So I'm turning 32 this year. I
Nice.
gave my life to the Lord around when I was about the age of 10 years old, got baptized when I was 12. And I've been living for the Lord ever since. Been involved in various church ministries, not only at my home church, which is Bethel Baptist in Halfway Tree, but also other church ministries by extension through UCCF. So being involved in UCCF at the university level, got me connected with many other Christians from around the country. And that caused me to grow in my poetry ministry. So I'm also a poet, and I write spoken word poetry. I have a book out called God Breathe, The Journey. And I recently started a podcast called The Worst Relationship Advice Ever. You definitely should not listen. And
Ah!
that's really just an oxymoronic title, just to intended to spark interest, intended to spark curiosity. Yeah, pretty much. Professionally, I'm a financial advisor. That's what I do for a living, and I've been enjoying that so far, as it
Nice.
allows me to interact with various different people on a daily basis, and I do enjoy serving people.
That's nice to hear, Darren. We want to get right into. So, Darren, first of all, how did you get started with this podcast? Like, what's behind it? The worst relationship advice ever. How you came up with that? How you got started with it?
All right, so it initially started on my WhatsApp status. So I would record these about 5 to 6 minute videos of myself just talking about relevant relationship topics. I'm a very big proponent for relationships. I believe that here on this earth, the most important thing to us as human beings is our relationships with one another. I enjoy sharing my perspective on relationship matters. I I called it the worst relationship advice ever because I am a failure in my relationships. I haven't been successful in the whole relationship sphere of things.
Mm-hmm.
I am divorced at the moment, and while I was married, I did write articles for Christian Today, um, along the same topics of relationship management and relationship advice. However, back then I couldn't implement those same advices in my relationship, primarily because my wife at the time just wasn't really seeking to work with me. And so, even though my articles won awards and they did very well, got a lot of traction, and were very popular at the time, in my own home, I couldn't experience what is it that I was actually talking about in my articles. And that's primarily because probably I wasn't always living out what I was speaking about in my articles. And so I tell you, being a Christian, you have these ideas of how things should go, how things ought to be based on what the Bible says, but actually living it out and having another person come in agreement and in alignment with what you're saying, that's a whole nother ball game.
Mm-hmm.
That's not as easy. That's not very simple. And
Nope.
so I call my relationship advice the worst ever because I don't necessarily have a track record of success in relationships. However, I do believe that what I have to say is valid, and if
Yes.
applied, it can actually bear good fruit.
So that's a good way and a good introduction of how it was started. Which now that we have the background, tell us what is considered a bad relationship advice.
Well, it's actually quite simple. Bad relationship advice is telling people to do hateful and spiteful things to one another. It's to tell someone not to forgive or not to extend grace or mercy. But, you know, I don't necessarily do that. My podcast is entitled The Worst Relationship Advice Ever, not because it's actually the worst, but primarily it's an oxymoronic smokescreen intended to trigger curiosity while at the same time conveying that I am no expert. I'm just seeking, I'm just speaking on what I believe, and even though I believe it, it doesn't mean I have mastered it myself. And so
Understood.
when it comes down to bad relationship advice, it's actually very easy to give bad relationship advice, but that is also open to interpretation because
I was about to say that. Mm-hmm.
a person could be thinking that they're giving good advice, but to the person who is receiving it, it could be bad.
Yes. And the next question I have for you is, do people intentionally give bad advice and why?
Well, yeah, people do seek to sabotage other people intentionally. We live in a cold, cold world, and hurt people usually seek to hurt people. But that's not what, I believe most people are seeking to do. I believe most people are probably seeking to give good advice. However, they may be giving it from their perspective, and their perspective might be shaped by their traumas, by their experiences, by their expectation of the opposite sex. However, I'm fully aware that not everyone will agree with what I may have to say. I believe that my advice is good advice, but not everyone will agree with what I have to say. And so, for some people, it will actually be horrible advice depending on the perspective that they approach relationships from.
And the situation that the person is in. So bad advice then is based on the receiver or the giver then.
Well, I would say both. The giver can say, "You should not be kind to that man because he is not pulling his weight as a man."
Mm-hmm.
And from my perspective, that's a bad advice from the giver because a man pulling his weight is a relative term. Because a man could be working very hard, 16-hour shifts, and bringing home money and doing what he can do, but even his best efforts are not enough. And so,
Right.
from someone else's perspective, he's not pulling his weight. And so, even though he might be doing his best, telling his wife to not be kind to him because he's not pulling his weight is really, really bad advice when he's actually doing his very best in his capacity, in his circumstances. So that would be bad advice from the giver. Um, the giver also, the giver could also say you should forgive your partner and make room for reconciliation. And the receiver goes ahead and does that without observing tangible change in the offender, and so subject themselves to the same abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So as a giver, you can say to a person that, hey, you should forgive and be reconciled, and that would be considered good advice. However, if a person just goes and does as they are told without considering whether or not the offender has repented of their sin, whether or not the offender has sought to make any tangible change, then they may be just subjecting themselves to the same abuse. In that instance, the relationship advice is bad based on the receiver.
Understood. So I have another foresight on this in terms of relationship advice, bad relationship advice. So I consider bad relationship advice also, in addition to what you said, getting advice from persons one who have never been married. I don't believe persons can give advice to married people if they have never been married, because they have never been in a situation to experience what married people experience.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't believe that single people can give advice to persons who are in relationships. What advice are you going to give us,
Mm.
knowing that you have never been in this situation? That's where I take it from my stand on it, and that's where I also would say it's not necessarily good advice, because you can't say to me, hey, try this, and you have never been in a situation to either try that for yourself.
Right.
That's some of the situations I would look as, okay, I know you're trying to help, but that's not good advice for me, because you cannot tell me what to do in a situation that you have no knowledge of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I tell you, relationships are so nuanced that there is no solid relationship advice that can work for every couple,
No.
which is which is why I don't like generalizations. I believe they are a lazy way of explaining human behavior. People who are single may have been in long-standing relationships,
Mm-hmm.
and so based on their experience of their long-standing relationship, they may feel as if they can add some value in terms of giving recommendations or advice. Um, there are people like Stephen Labossiere and Matthew Husey, who are known relationship advice givers who are not married themselves, not in any relationship, but they have like psychological knowledge and probably have been in relationships before, and they probably have observed many relationships. But when it comes on to married couples, the primary aim of any relationship advice giver to a married couple, it would be to help the couple to stay together, to stay married, and to not consider divorce. At all costs, trying to preserve that union. But oftentimes, when we're giving advice, sometimes we want one or the other person in the relationship to experience some reprieve, some emotional relief, some peace, and that is oftentimes very difficult to come by, especially if the other person in the relationship isn't on the same page as the advice giver. So the advice giver has to be cognizant of what the full picture is. You can't just hear what the woman is saying and be okay, I'm going to give advice based on what the woman is saying to me. Or hear what the man is saying and say, okay, I'm going to give advice based on what the man is saying to me. You kind of have to get the full picture of what both people are experiencing. to even be able to scratch the surface of what could possibly be beneficial to the relationship on a whole, opposed to just beneficial to the husband or just beneficial to the wife.
So both parties have to be involved in that. Um, I'm gonna use counseling or
Yeah,
that
yeah,
counsel that's
definitely.
being given. Both parties have to be involved. So if it is that is only one party that's being involved, you don't think the results are going to be as it should be. It won't be too positive because you're only
It
getting one
depends.
side of the story. Okay.
It depends on where the relationship advice is geared. So if you're talking to just the wife, the relationship advice cannot be geared to what the wife should do to change her husband. That that will always be bad. That will always be horrible advice. If
Okay.
if you're if if the wife says, "Okay, I'm gonna go talk to somebody and see if I can get some advice," and that advice giver goes, "Okay, this is what you should do in order to get a positive response from your husband." No, you should not go with that motive. Rather, the advice should be, okay, this is what you should do to improve yourself. And this is what you should do to take responsibility or to take ownership of the problem.
Hmm.
And then hopefully, the collateral effect will be a positive impact on your husband that will bring about the change. But that is not the primary motive. The primary motive is to fix your perspective. It's to fix your attitude. It's to fix your demeanor. It's to fix your perspective.
So don't
So
go into a relationship counseling or don't go for counseling to fix someone. That's a bad advice.
right, to fix somebody else, yeah.
Okay. Can a bad advice actually work for a relationship?
Yes, it can, depending on how you look at it. The advice given by Paul in Corinthians 7 could be considered bad. He is telling believers to stay with a non believer. Yet the non believer has full permission to leave if they want to. That sounds like bad advice to me, especially because we aren't supposed to be yoked together with unbelievers. Because what union can light have with darkness, right? But there's deeper meaning to it.
Yes, there is.
And so, from an emotional standpoint, it can seem as if what Paul is saying is bad advice. You're telling a believing wife to stay with her non believing husband, not even fully understanding the gravity of the situation she may be in as a result of her being in relationship with a non-believer husband. But I believe what Paul is trying to communicate here is the importance of the souls of the family members who are in her immediate care. So if the wife is a believer, the soul of her husband and the souls of her children is what is most important to God. And so her example, her light that she shines in her home is what sanctifies the other members of the household and what will potentially bring about their salvation. And so Paul encourages the wife to stay, even though her husband is a non-believer. And so
Hmm.
what that scripture drives home to me is just what is the main prerogative of God? Is it our happiness or is it our holiness? And we as his tools in the earth, what does he want us to accomplish in our relationships? Is it for us to be comfortable and happy and nice all the time? Or is it for us to bring heaven to earth, for us to be kingdom people in the earth, regardless of how difficult or how unorthodox our situation may be? And so, yeah, it's all about perspective when it comes down to whether or not relationship advice is good or bad.
How does positive perception change a bad advice? How does forgiving someone who abuses you, whether it be woman, whether it be man, how does staying with that person and I'm going to bring it back to the church. I grew up in the
Mm-hmm.
church also. The church advises people stay in your marriage, work on it, work. Even if the man a kid you, stay in your marriage and work on it. I'm not even gonna dive deep into how I feel about that.
Mm-hmm.
But if people look at it a particular way, it may not even be just abuse, but staying something that you're unhappy with. How looking at that positively, how can that change?
As I said before, it's all about perspective and what is a person's MO. Coming the from pop culture and Disney culture and just how we grew up and what has been communicated to us with regards to what relationships ought to look like. The boy meets the girl and they date for a while and they go through some ups and downs, but eventually they work things out, they get married, and then they live happily ever after. And so a lot of us, when we're getting married, we're anticipating the happily ever after, but then that doesn't happen right away. You know, I would say a lot of couples, the first 7 years of their marriage is like really, really hard. They have to,
Mm-hmm.
work really hard to stay together because we don't really want it to be work. We don't really want it to be hard. We think if this person loves us and we love them, it's supposed to be easy. And that's possibly because we have a wrong perception of what love is. In my podcast, that's what I've been speaking about lately, just the true meaning and definition of love and what it really is, and how it really is not this fairy tale, lovey dovey, chocolate and roses thing that media has probably sold to us. But from a
No.
biblical perspective, it's patience, it's kindness, it does not boast, does not envy, does not hold any records of wrongs, is not self seeking, is not proud. All of these things are not very easy for us to do as human beings. As human beings, we're naturally selfish, we're naturally prideful. We want what we want. We want our relationships to follow a certain path or a certain trajectory. And so when the other person who we're in relationship with is not lining up with what we want, hanging on to them and sticking with them is next to impossible. And so yes, there is a lot of forgiveness that is required of us. But if we don't have an end goal or an end vision of what this forgiveness is going to birth in us and in our relationship, then we're going to have a very hard time actually walking that out. So it's one thing to try to forgive, it's another thing to forgive with the end in mind, knowing that my forgiveness is having a positive impact not only on me, but also on the other person, especially if the other person is sorry. Because it's very painful when a person apologizes and they really want to do better, they're really seeking to improve, but the other person refuses to forgive them. The other person continues to treat them with contempt, all because they still remember the offense, all because they still have the hurt feelings. But really and truly, forgiveness has nothing to do with our feelings or our memory. It's a decision. And once we decide to forgive, our actions need to follow. Our emotions might not line up right away. The emotions may take a little time to heal, but
Right.
but our actions need to be one that follow the decision that we have made to forgive, and those actions are
Understood.
are loving actions.
Understood, Darren. But it's still a bit easier said than done.
Definitely.
It's easier said that we can say we forgive and we let's forgive and let's talk about it and let's move on. We can say that out of our mouths, out of the side of our mouths, everywhere in our mouth, we can say that. But when it's supposed to happen and we're in the moment, because we have to also remember we're human beings. We're
Hmm.
supposed to kill ourselves daily. That's what the Bible even talks about. But we are human beings, and the mere fact that we're supposed to kill ourselves daily, to be like how Christ wants us to be is because these things will keep on coming on us daily. And for us to live like how Christ wants us to live, we ought to say, you know what, I feel this way now, but I have decided to move on. And sometimes we can't do it by ourselves, so we have to ask the Holy Spirit to help us. Help
Mm-hmm.
us in this situation and help us. You know our hearts. You know that we are affected because, Darren, there's some things that one can't get past. That's the truth. Um, I don't believe in fairy tales. I've never believed in fairy tales. I've never been that woman to believe in fairy tale anything.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some things that, yes, marriage is work. Marriage is work. And it's something you have to work on constantly because you have to get up every day and choose this person every day. You have to get up and, despite what is happening, to decide that this is the person you want to be with, you want to continue loving. There are certain things, Darren, that we can't just move from. And it's not that we don't want to, it's some things that we just realize we can't. We can't. And that's something that
Well,
we have to take to God. So it's not also because we don't want to forgive or we don't want to love the person or we don't want to be our best selves with them, but it's just that we can't. And at that point, we'll probably have to look into ourselves and say, why can't I? And probably we need to get help for our own situations, to figure out what's happening. But there's some people, Darren, that can't. They can't. And it's not that they don't love anymore. It's not that they don't
mm-hmm.
want to forgive the person. But we're human beings and we are going to remember. And we also need to remember the Bible says, be wise as a serpent. We have to also be wise in decisions that we're making. If it is that we're making decisions to forgive, we forgive every day, and the same thing keeps happening. The person said they're sorry every day, and we forgive every day. We can't continue living our life in something that is constantly hurting us, or constantly we feel as if this person is trying to hurt us. Love is not supposed to hurt. I don't care what anybody says.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to unintentionally hurt each other, but when it comes to intentionally hurting people, I don't believe that's how it's supposed to be. I don't. And this may also be a bad relationship advice on my part, but that's just how I see it, Darren. Yeah.
When it comes on to forgiveness, there are certain fundamental things that need to be established, right? So one fundamental thing is what Paul speaks about in Philippians 2. In verse 5, he says, in your relationships with one another, take on the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who was in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. And so, what Paul is saying here is the, the foundation and the primary ingredient for forgiveness is humility. It's to recognize that just as much as my partner is human and they have done something to hurt me, I could very well do the same thing. I could very
Mm-hmm.
well do something that hurts them so badly that they
Yes.
would have a hard time forgiving me.
Understood.
And if they could not forgive me for the offense that I have done to them, how would I feel? If I am sincerely sorry, if I am sincerely making an effort to change, and this person just cannot forgive me because my offense was just so atrocious, how would I feel?
Understood.
And so then once you have grasped that idea of humility and that you need grace just as much as your other person needs grace, the next thing is belief. Like I said in my latest episode of my podcast, belief will make the difference in every situation. As a financial advisor, I interview different people, and everybody has 10 fingers, 10 toes. Well, not everybody, but most people who I interview, 10 fingers, 10 toes. They have a brain that works. They have pretty much all that they need. They have the resources in terms of mental and physical capacity to generate wealth and become wealthy. However, the main difference that I have observed between my clients who are wealthy and my clients who are not is belief. Do they believe that they can be wealthy? Do they believe that it is okay to be wealthy? Do they believe that it is right to be wealthy? That belief factor is what is going to now determine what the outcome of their life is going to be. It starts right there. So if a person believes that they cannot forgive, trust me, they cannot forgive. They can't. Because why? Because that's what they believe. But if they believe that they can, if they believe that they can heal, if they believe that they can get over this, if they believe that they can see the good in the other person eventually, then eventually they will. Eventually they will come to a place of forgiveness. Eventually they will extend that grace and extend that mercy. But if they believe that they can't, then really and truly they can't. So mixing that humility with the belief that it is actually possible is a very beginning of how a person can forgive. And then the more they forgive is the easier it becomes. The easier it becomes is the faster they can do it. Now on the flip side, what if you're in relationship with a person who is not genuinely sorry, who is not seeking to reconcile, who is not seeking to make peace, who is not seeking to right their wrongs? Should you continuously forgive such a person? And I would say no. And so that is why we have such a thing as divorce. That is
You
why, that's
can't.
possibly why you are divorced. That's possibly why I
Mm,
am divorced.
no,
Is because
Darren. Darren, all right.
being in
So
relationship with a person who is not seeking to right their wrongs, being in a relationship with a person who is intentionally trying to hurt you, who is not trying to make any change, is very, very difficult. And so I could
I,
never say
I
to a
get that.
person
I
that
get that a
they
hundred
should definitely
percent.
stick it out.
I get that 100%.
Hmm.
But I'm still gonna say I can forgive. I can forgive. I didn't get divorced because I didn't forgive. I got divorced because I forgave. That is the difference. And
Okay.
I don't even know how to explain it, but that's just how it worked. The Bible said we're to forgive 70 times 7. It never said don't forgive if the person continues hurting you. That's where wisdom comes in. I can forgive you, but do I have to stay with you? No. But I
Right.
forgave you.
There is a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation.
Right. We don't have to reconcile it, but I can forgive you.
Right. Right.
That's
Right. Right. Yeah,
that
man.
that yeah, that's where it is. That's where it is. So I can forgive you. You can hurt me and I can keep forgiving you, but do I have to stay with you? No. Because your intention is not to be married. Your intention is not to stay and work on a marriage and let's work together. Your intention is to continue to hurt. So I mean, we have vast different ways of looking at these things, in terms of even the Bible, the scriptures, what God says about these things. But I also believe having this conversation personal with God, having a relationship with God, to let God, this is what's happening, God. In all our ways, we are to acknowledge God. In everything that we do, we're to bring it before God. This is what is
Right. Right.
happening. God, I need help. Listen, I'm very straightforward with God, how I talk to Him, how my communication, my relationship with Him. That's how it is. God, I need help here. I need help there. I cannot do this anymore, God. I need a way out. God provided a way out. I also wrote a book on this. And that's why it's also important to not take advice from any and everybody, because people
Right.
don't know what happens behind closed doors. People don't know. We can tell people anything we want to tell people. That may not be the truth. There are three sides to a story: the two persons and the truth. And
Hmm.
humanly, we don't tell everybody every single detail that happens. We don't.
Hmm.
There are things that are hidden, so people can't actually give you the right advice if they don't know everything that's happening. And sometimes people
True.
can be skewed on what they give you based on their feelings, because now we talk about counter transference. So because I never liked this man because he did something to me, when you're not talking about this man did something to you, it triggers me and I give you an advice based on what I've been through. So these things just lead to, listen, not everybody is equipped to give a a good relationship advice. And most of the times we hear bad relationship advice from everywhere. We are talking about media, people, friends, whoever it is, whatever it is. And it's best to take things with a grain of salt and not just take things and apply it to your relationship, because everybody's relationship is different. So you might think, Darren, that you're giving bad advice. Sometimes you probably are not, but people need to take what you're saying and see if it applies to their relationship. I may
Right,
think I'm
right.
giving people bad advice, whether or not it is true. People listen to what I say, and if it applies to their relationship, you take it and you use it. If it doesn't, you discard it. That's what we need to do. And that is why sometimes these bad relationship, quote unquote, helps. Sometimes it doesn't. And we just have to be cognizant of who we're taking advice from, how we're using the advice that we get, and make sure we are not using the advice to be manipulative or to cause more harm than good.
Yeah, man. They're very nuanced, and so there's nothing. I know that there's nothing I can say on my podcast that can be applied to every situation,
Right.
you know. And
And
I'm
that's
really just
okay.
speaking from my perspective, from my personal experience, what I have, and
Right.
I haven't experienced all the different relationship dynamics out there.
Right. And I mean, you're only giving a perspective of what you think it is. And that's fine. That's fine. It's no one people who are listening and taking in your information to decide whether this is for them or not.
Right, right.
It's just what it is. We have to realize that we're in a world where so many things are there's so many information. We have to be decisive as to what we take on. That's really on us, not on anybody else. That's on us.
True, true.
Darren, where is it that we can find you?
Well, my Instagram page is Darren the Poet.
Mm-hmm.
On TikTok, the worst relationship advice ever. Like my TikTok is kind of growing in terms of my followers.
Okay.
YouTube, the worst relationship advice ever. That's
Mm-hmm.
where you'll be able to see the video recording of the podcast. On Spotify, the worst relationship advice ever. And
Mm-hmm.
here, the podcast on Spotify, it is published every Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. That's
Nice.
when the new episodes come out.
Nice.
And you can also find me at my office in New
Ah, Darren, so
Kingston.
we can find him in his office. Please don't go to his office. I'm begging you. Oh gosh. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Darren. I appreciate you coming on. And we're having this frank conversation. It's needed. It's needed.
Yeah, man, definitely. It was my
Yeah.
pleasure.
Yes. And thank you to my listeners for listening to The Unfiltered by Jade. We'll be back next week, Tuesday. Thank you.